Hello, I'm Dr. Louise Freeman. I'm the co-chair of the Doctor Support Network. We're a small charity. We've been around since 1996 and we facilitate informal peer support for UK-based medics who are worried about their own mental health. In addition, we campaign to improve doctors' mental health. The particular reason for having this event today is that we are honoured to have received a substantial donation from the directors of the Downing Strategic Microcap Investment Trust. And this was last year, and they were sort of watching the pandemic unfold, and they were very concerned about the stress on medics' mental health. So, of course, we're hugely grateful for this. And what the project that we've come up with to use these funds for is focused short-term coaching for doctors who've been working in the NHS within the previous year. And Jan's going to say more about coaching, and in the open forum there'll be opportunity for anybody to ask questions. So really just thank you so much for thinking of DSN for this donation. And the first part of this meeting, after the intro, is that we're going to have a talk on getting well and keeping well as a doctor from Dr. Richard Duggins, who's a consultant psychiatrist and psychotherapist who works with Cumbria, Northumberland, Tyne and Wear NHS Trust. He's the clinical lead for NHS practitioner health in the North East and Cumbria. And Richard has been working in the physician health field probably for a couple of decades now, having previously led the specialist psychotherapy service for doctors in the North East, which was House Concern.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me here, especially as it's such an important launch of such an incredible initiative that's going to clearly make a big difference to a number of doctors' lives at such an important time. So it's wonderful to be here with you, and it's wonderful to be part of this launch. So I'll just say a little bit about myself, and then I'll launch my slides, and we can have a conversation. I'm happy to be interrupted and ask questions as I go along, and there'll also be plenty of time for questions at the end, and you've got an open forum at the end of the meeting as well, so should be good. Okay, great. So I think Louise has said most of the things about me, really. So I'm a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist, and I've had the pleasure of spending most of my clinical time as a consultant over the last 14 years in assessing and treating doctors who are struggling with their psychological well-being, and I continue to be able to do that as a clinical lead within NHS practitioner health, which I will say a bit more about. Okay, I thought I'd start by kind of thinking, where are we now? And the image there is obviously Sisyphus in Tartarus pushing that boulder up the hill, and I think it has felt like that for many doctors. We had the first wave, and then we had the second wave, and now we're in a position where straight after the second wave, as the second wave is receding, we're having to deal with waiting lists and everyone who's now coming through, who thankfully are now feeling safe to come through, but there's an awful lot of work to do. So I think a lot of people are feeling like that. So where we know we are is we've got a lot of exhausted staff at risk of burnout. So this couldn't be a better time for a coaching initiative. We've got exhausted staff at risk of burnout. But what was quite interesting is the most recent NHS staff survey showed that actually morale wasn't as bad as people thought it could be. That people were reporting that that managers were probably for some people for the first time taking a positive interest in their health and well-being, and also saying that actually some doctors were benefiting from more creative working patterns, including more flexibility in their working. So it's so I think we're at a critical point, and can the NHS use this terrible trauma that it's been through as a chance for growth, improvement, or change, or will it just be a trauma where we're left with the pain from it and we learn nothing and nothing changes? So it's I think we are at a critical point, and obviously I'm optimistic. I hope it's going to go in a positive direction, but we will wait to see, and it'll be important for doctors' wellbeing in the future. Okay, so I'm going to today. I'm just going to start with a kind of Doctors' Health 101. Well, what I'd usually tell people about doctors' health if they had the misfortune of being stuck in an elevator with me. And I think that is important for recovery and staying well, because the more we know about doctors' health and the facts around it, the more we can perhaps manage it and also recognise it in our colleagues. I'm going to talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth, which has been a popular topic during the pandemic and I think is important. And then I'm going to talk at the end about some helpful supports that are out there, because I think these probably can't be mentioned too much. Okay. So to start with the kind of Doctors' Health 101, the first thing that I'm sure most people within DSN certainly know are these three facts about doctors' health. So doctors are a high risk group regarding psychological disorders. They are at higher risk than the average population of depression. They are high risk of alcohol issues. They are at high risk of drug misuse issues, and they are very sadly at higher risk than the general population of death. And that is because the risk of suicide within doctors, as we all know, is higher than the general population. So this is the one I'm in. I'm talking about doctors being a high-risk group. Doctors being a high-risk group is perhaps best demonstrated if we talk about female doctors who are at 4 times the rate of the general population of becoming depressed, and are twice the rate of the general population of becoming depressed, and very sadly 4 times the rate of the general population of ending their life by suicide. So very high risk doctors. Doctors also a hard to reach group, and this is mainly due to shame and stigma, but it's also to do with worries around confidentiality. I'm really pleased to see the thoughtfulness in how this coaching initiative's been set up, because it gets around many of those concerns around shame, stigma and confidentiality in the self-referral and the way it's been expertly managed. But doctors are a hard to reach group. The Doctor Support Network have done a lot to address this, probably more than anyone else in the UK, partly by their very existence and their effectiveness in being a peer support group, but also in some of their surveys they've done on stigma, and also the Doctor Support Network's work, which they've been linked to in the kind of the very important And Me campaign, where people who have been through psychological distress as doctors have kind of talked about it and normalised things. So really important. But doctors remain a really hard to reach group. But the good news is that once doctors do come through to help, then their outcomes are great. So when doctors come through to NHS Practitioner Health, we get really, really good outcomes with doctors. So I in my clinical work, I treat doctors and I treat people who aren't doctors, and doctors typically do a lot better than other patients. So the outcomes are great. And I think doctors who come through to this coaching initiative can expect a similar thing. There is something I think just about doctors who come through for support in the ability to be able to tell their own story, to have that story treated with importance and seriousness that helps the doctor themselves take their struggles seriously and their recovery seriously. So there are three key things: doctors high risk group, hard to reach group, but outcomes are great for doctors who come through for support and help. Okay. The other thing I'm going to talk about is just to say a little bit about resilience, because I think resilience has been really misunderstood, and the important things about resilience is a quality of the system around the doctor. It's not a quality of the doctor. So when you hear people say this person's more resilient than this person, that is just rubbish. It's a way of blaming the doctor. So this is a really useful diagram that was devised by the psychiatrist Lorna Dunn, and at the bottom you've got burnout and you've got resilience, and you can see that the on the left hand side you've got the negative inputs. So you've got the things that drain energy, so stress, internal conflict, time and energy demands. And on the right you've got the positive inputs: psychosocial support, both within work and outside work, social and healthy activities, intellectual stimulation, and you can see there is mentorship, and of course alongside mentorship goes coaching. So this initiative here is putting in a very positive support that will increase resilience within the system. And it's the balance between those negative and positive inputs, alongside something about the personality and temperament of the doctor, but that is actually quite a small factor that then balances this out. One of the things about this diagram, I mean, this diagram's been around for over 5 years, but it explains why things have been so difficult one of the reasons why things have been so difficult for doctors in COVID, because the stress, the internal conflict, the time and energy demands have gone up massively. But the positive input, the things that keep us well, our ability to access psychosocial support because of social distancing and lockdown, the ability for us to access our social and healthy activities, and the intellectual stimulation bit is the things we do in work or outside work that bring us intellectual stimulation, which have also been curtailed with COVID. So you can see how COVID has affected this balance dramatically for doctors. So that's the reason why we've seen this massive increase in burnout during the pandemic, which I'll mention later. Okay. And then the final thing in this kind of Doctors Health 101 bit I'm going to cover is the performance cliff. The performance cliff I like to share because it is the way about 70%, 2/3 of doctors present to services like the one I work in, like NHS Practitioner Health. And what you've got here is a line of occupational performance. So you've got an initial plateau where that occupational performance is pretty much maintained. Doctors are functioning well at work. And then you've got a cliff where the occupational performance drops off very quickly, usually resulting in the doctor needing to take some ill health leave. And then you've got a recovery phase for the doctors that come in for health and support that goes up. What's important here is the plateau is not a brief phrase. So usually when you talk to a doctor who I meet and you look back on their period of illness, they can recognise they've probably been in this plateau phase for at least 6 months, sometimes about 2 years. The cliff is a brief phrase, usually taking people by surprise, including the doctor themselves, can be over a few weeks. And the recovery phase is briefer than many people think for the majority of people, not for everyone, but it's usually about 4 to 6 months. When people tend to see me, sadly, just before the cliff or just after the cliff, but I'd imagine where this coaching initiative is going to come in is it's going to be helping doctors much earlier on the plateau because it's self-referral, and also I think it's going to be helping doctors in the recovery phase. That's probably where I think you'll attract the doctors to this coaching initiative. But let me say a little bit more about the plateau, because the plateau is perhaps the most interesting thing, because this is the thing for 6 months, 2 years, the doctor's going along before their struggles become visible and they need to take ill health leave or need some reduction in their work. So what's going on in the plateau is usually a piling up of small pressures and small traumas, and the piling up is the important thing, because there is no time for reflection or dealing with the trauma between them. Now, these pressures and traumas are often at work, but they're often also at home. And one of the most difficult things for doctors is often when they both come together. So there's difficulties at work and at home at the same time. And these pile up. So there's no time to kind of deal with them in between. There's no kind of decompression in between. Doctors tend to cope with a piling up of traumas by something that's called the exhaustion funnel, which you might have seen. But basically this means that what doctors tend to do under stress and under pressure is increasingly focus on their work. So that they tend to drop outside activities, so social activities and fun activities outside work, enjoyable pastimes. And it's called a funnel because the doctors kind of get further and further down this funnel with more and more focus on work. And because there's more and more focus on work and they're not doing the things that would make them more resilient, like that psychosocial support and enjoyable pastimes, it actually makes things more and more difficult. But it's the doctor's kind of wish to preserve their work and their dedication to the work that can sometimes make things more difficult on the plateau. The other thing that happens on the plateau is linked to what we're taught to do as doctors under pressure. So we're taught to cope really by keeping calm and carrying on, putting our heads down and soldiering on when we're under pressure. And we do that, but it means we ignore the problems that are building up. And the problem with ignoring your problems is they don't get dealt with, and they pile up even further until you reach the cliff and the kind of last straw that breaks the camel's back. Shame and stigma are also important on the plateau. This stops people reaching out for help, and the fear of confidentiality also stops people reaching out for help. So there's a number of things going on the plateau when you typically talk to doctors about what's been going on earlier before their need for ill health leave comes in. Just say a little bit about the recovery stage before I move on. Most doctors do get very good outcomes, recover well. But what's within this diagram is the recovery, the end of the kind of line for recovery phase is purposely slightly higher than it was on the plateau. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is that that actually doctors have been struggling for quite a long time before they reach the cliff, and therefore when they've recovered, they do sometimes have a feeling that they haven't felt this well for a while. But I think the other thing that happens, especially if recovery goes really well, is some doctors can report some growth from their period of illness. So a slightly different perspective on things following their illness, which I think can also help their occupational performance. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, so that's the performance cliff. But I suppose the obvious thing is a different journey might be possible. So I don't think going from the plateau to the cliff is necessarily the route that all doctors need to take, and a different journey could be possible that goes along that. But in order to take this different journey, one of the key things is that we need support for doctors that they can access early, and doctors need to be supported to access that early. And of course, this coaching project could well be part of that for some doctors on the plateau who can access this coaching and perhaps take a different journey, can nip things in the bud before it then develops. There's a moral argument for helping doctors take a different journey, obviously, but there's also an economic argument because and for organisations, because helping doctors avoid having to break down is good for the doctor, but it is also good for our patients because we don't need to disrupt their care. Okay. Okay. So just a little bit about what seems to help doctors recover, but also I think what would help doctors on the plateau. And some of this learning is from doctors who have been through a period of ill health and have told me about what they are doing differently to manage pressures now. So certainly things that seem to help are these: making sure basic needs are met. So this is things to do with, you know, is the doctor working reasonable hours or overworking? Is it possible or to take annual leave? Is it possible to take study leave? Is there space and time in the day to be able to talk to colleagues and have support with your work? And I think we could think of other basic needs as well, but they need to be remembered. The other thing that seems to help is when doctors put decompression activities in their day or their week, and this is leaving time for pleasurable pastimes and physical exercise. And these decompression activities can help this piling up of trauma. Social activities and social support certainly help. And of course, when doctors become stressed and they focus on work, these are one of the things that can go. But they are so important in helping everyone keep going. And the other thing that helps is seeking support early. So seeking informal support from colleagues or more formal support, such as this coaching initiative or the other support services. That helps. Okay, so building on that, I'm going to talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth. I think this will be familiar for both of you, for many of you, but just to say a little bit about it. And this is about positive psychological change that comes out of adversity. I was always a bit skeptical about post-traumatic growth because I thought that it was kind of sugarcoating a very difficult experience. But the more I've been in this field, the more I do think there is something in it. And post-traumatic growth is relevant now because we've been through the COVID we're going through and coming out, hopefully, of the COVID pandemic. So we've had that stress. But I also think it's relevant for doctors who have been through difficult times that have challenged their psychological well-being as well. So a little bit about post-traumatic growth. So there's a nice quote from Ernest Hemingway, which I think covers post-traumatic growth, which life breaks everyone, and afterwards many are strong at the broken places. And this is another kind of comment about post-traumatic growth I like, by Richard Gist. Richard Gist is an educator in the USA who works with firemen in the USA, and he has lots to say about post-traumatic growth, very interestingly. So he says every life at some point must be tested by adversity. We must face losses we can neither prevent nor reverse, confront threats we can never fully neutralize, and master challenges both sought and assumed. With adversity comes sorrow and distress, but also from its mastery comes strength, character, and resolve, which is a good summary of post-traumatic growth. So in the studies around post-traumatic growth, mainly actually done in blue light workers, so fire, ambulance, and police, they find that if there is post-traumatic growth, there is evidence of growth in compassion for ourselves and others, that people feel stronger, that they learn to, this is a kind of police term, they learn to struggle well, which means that we all struggle at work, but people who struggle well more easily ask for help early on, they nip things in the bud, but they also routinely talk and seek support from each other. And also interestingly, and I don't know how this works in health, is some people who've been through traumatic experiences but feel they've grown through them actually start to feel a more pride in being part of the professional family. So if this is handled well, it can work well for the profession. Last thing I'm going to say about post-traumatic growth is there's a key to it, and I think this is what's so important. That post-traumatic growth is most likely to happen if we're supported to take good care of ourselves, but also if we receive support from each other following a difficult experience. So what can make the difference between something being a trauma which we don't grow from and the chance of a trauma that we do grow from is really that support that we receive afterwards. And that's really important for all services with doctors, but it's also, I think it says something about this coaching initiative that if this is at this time supporting doctors who've gone through the experiences through COVID that may have tested their psychological well-being, that may allow people to grow from this rather than it sit with them just as a trauma without any growth. Okay. So I'm going to just end by just saying, knowing what support's available. There's a key thing in psychological first aid, which is look, listen, and link. So look is to be alert that our colleagues may be struggling with psychological health difficulties. We know it's very common within doctors. So are we looking out for it? Are we being alert for it? Are we trying to spot it? The listen bit is the look, that's the look bit. The listen bit is actually, it can make a hell of a difference just to ask a colleague how they are and to listen to that and to take it seriously. But the link bit is if we have a colleague who is struggling, how do we, if necessary, link them to places that can support them? And I'd say these, for me, are the key supports currently available in the UK. You may wish to add your own, and I'm very happy for you to do so. But there's certainly NHS Practitioner Health, which is available in England and Scotland now. So NHS Practitioner Health is a self-referral service for psychological difficulties and addictions, and has been a massive success story. I would argue but has also been very tested by COVID. So in the first 10 years of NHS practitioner health, it saw 5,000 patients. In the last year, during COVID, it saw 5,000 patients. So that is how much the COVID pandemic has affected doctors. We're now seeing twice as many doctors referred this year as we were seeing the previous year. It's open to every doctor and dentist in England, and it's also now been opened to non-doctors who are band 8D and above, and it's also been open to all NHS staff, but they need to go through the local wellbeing hubs first to be referred to us. In Scotland, it's now open to all health and social care staff. So there's been a massive expansion of NHS practitioner health in the last few months. And do go on the website, it's self-referral, and we're very quick at seeing people. Health for Health Professionals is the service in Wales. Once again, self-referral can offer CBT and other kind of guided support. The BMA Counselling and Peer Support, I think, is an excellent telephone service. You don't need to be a BMA member. It can also, which is quite unusual for these services, it provides support for our dependents as well. So I think that can be very important, because the other services, as far as I'm aware, don't. Doc Health is a psychotherapy service that is partially funded. Doctors do have to pay a bit towards it, that offers online as in video therapy, and is another well-rated service. And of course, the peer support services that are absolutely critical, of which the two biggest are the Doctor Support Network and the British Doctors and Dentists Group, and British Doctors and Dentists Group, and particularly for people who have addictions concerns. So I think that for me, they're the kind of big five, if you say. Right. Okay. So kind of coming to the end. This is what I've tried to cover today. I hope I have. So I've talked about a kind of Doctors Health 101, talked about doctors being high risk, hard to reach, but outcomes being really well. Talked a bit about my understanding of resilience and how it can be unhelpfully misunderstood, and also talked about the performance cliff, and hopefully brought into that why I think this coaching initiative is going to be so important. Talked a bit about post-traumatic growth, really important at this time, and then ended just flagging up a few helpful supports. So thank you very much.
I'm now going to ask Dr. Jan Birtle, who's our lead coach, who's very kindly assembled our coaching team for the project. And Jan is going to explain a bit about coaching and how it works for us.
Hi everybody, it's good to see you all. It's a rather wet early evening. So thanks very much for that kind introduction, for asking me to come and speak to you today. I won't keep you too long, but I wanted to just give you a chance to hear a little bit about what coaching is, what the benefits of coaching are, and an opportunity also for people to ask some questions. So I'm pleased to see that both Jeff, Martin and Andrew Lee here are also in the meeting. They're two of my colleagues that are working hard to develop coaching for DSN. Hi, Andrew. So Jeff's got a blank screen at the moment. But...
Hi, Jan.
Oh, brilliant. Great. Good to see you. So I thought I'd just give, there's just a very few slides here, but I thought it's really helpful to say, what are we talking about? We talk about coaching. So what is coaching? There's quite a lot of definitions of coaching. So there's a couple here that I've put up on the screen. And I think they both give a nice flavour of that equal relationship that comes in coaching. So coach works with clients to achieve speedy, increased and sustainable effectiveness in their lives and careers through focused learning. important to think about. It's not just about career, it's actually about life as well. And I will come back to that and elaborate on that. The coach's sole aim is to work with the client to achieve all the client's potential as defined by the client. So it's very much about what does this client, this coachee, want to get out of this relationship and out of this time that they're spending in discussion. It's very much focused around them and their wishes and their aims, their aspirations, and sometimes just finding space to think, what are my aspirations and how realistic are they and where might I start in taking some steps forward. And then this really nice description by Mary Connor and Julia Pecora. Both coaching and mentoring are learning relationships which help people to take charge of their own development, to release their potential and to achieve results which they value. So again, it's about people taking charge, but actually working with another person to do that. And I think one of the really key things, particularly in coaching doctors, that we find out time and time again, is how important it is to have a confidential space, to have a relationship in which one can open up and talk about anything that is really, really important, and actually have a very open way of having a dialogue and thinking space about that. So I think doctors often do suffer from isolation, and it can be mental isolation, a sense of being alone, not so much as actually being on their own, but that feeling of carrying burdens, heavy responsibilities, I think that many doctors do. And just to have a space to talk, particularly I think with another person who is also medically trained, who understands some of the issues around being a doctor, I think could be really helpful. So some people say, what's the difference between coaching and mentoring? They do overlap quite a bit. And certainly the skills of coaching are used a lot in mentoring relationships. But mentoring tends often to be a longer term relationship, maybe over a couple of years, whereas coaching is generally a shorter framework, maybe 4 to 6 sessions, something around that length of duration. Mentoring tends to be more informal and coaching is a little bit more structured and scheduled. And the mentor is often somebody who's more senior in a similar profession to the mentee, whereas a coach often may be outside of their immediate profession and they wouldn't have direct experience of the client's role, but are able to use the coaching framework to help the coachee explore things. So mentoring revolves more about developing the mentee professionally, whereas coaching is more about specific development areas or issues. Okay, so people that come for coaching might come because they want to take up a leadership role, or they've taken up a role and they're finding it quite difficult to manage, or they want to actually be able to make more of it and think about how they might use more of their skills and expertise in their role. Sometimes people come for coaching after a difficult issue has cropped up in their work life, or because they're in a dilemma about the sort of pushes and pulls of home life versus their working life. So they might come with various different issues, and this just gives a private space to explore that. I think sometimes people think mentoring is very much about having somebody much older and more senior, and it's a cozy chat. Really interesting that many successful people, and we've been talking to, I'm part of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and I've been talking to some very senior people in the college, and most of them say, yes, I had some coaching during my career and it was really, really helpful. So I think it's just really important that actually this is an approach which can really help them to develop themselves. And mentoring is not like for touchy-feely kind of process. You know, you can actually be quite challenging in mentoring while you're thinking about particular problems. I think this is a really helpful way of thinking about coaching and mentoring, common areas where actually we're thinking about the client who's coming along to the session as having a lot of resources. And the role of the coach is to help spring loose the client's resourcefulness. It's a really nice kind of phrase, that. And often people get very stuck. They feel that they're kind of in a bit of a corner and can't find a way out of this. And this is actually opening up thinking to consider things in a rather different sort of way. And often some steps forward can be taken, and movement can happen quite quickly once momentum starts to take people forward. Coaching addresses the whole person, and I'll come on to that a bit more in my next slide, where the client actually is a person that sets the agenda. So they say what they want to talk about, and the coach will follow that agenda, but also open it out into wider areas and then bring it back into thinking about what actions then the coachee, the mentee will take forward. So there's also kind of process in each session about, well, okay, so we've talked about this, we've explored the pros and cons of it. Now, what are you going to commit to doing? And I like to actually write that down with the person. Been playing around, improving my Zoom skills, as most of us have during the last few months. And actually I've started using the whiteboard on Zoom. So we have a kind of shared document that both myself and my coachee can see. And making some notes, I think, is really helpful because it gives you a kind of sense of framework and commitment. And also you can come back and review then how a person has been progressing against those. So coaching is about change and it's about action. And I think this is just a really, really helpful slide showing the kind of issues between professional and personal overlap. You know, that actually we function best as doctors when our well-being is being looked after both by ourselves, by the teams that we work with, by the organizations where we work. And that's really, really important. And actually we function much better when we are being well treated. And just a slight digression there, we've just adopted a rescue dog. And so it's 3 weeks today since we brought this little dog home from the Dogs Trust. And clearly she's been very, very traumatized and really, really anxious. And we're trying to sort of get to know her and read her behavior. And she'll start quaking at times. And, you know, we're trying to work out whether she's actually fearful, whether she's cold, trying to pick up the signals and think about this. But, you know, she's really kind of settling in, getting attached, feeling more comfortable, starting to relax much more around us. And so it's just that sense of we're looking after her well-being. She feels that the benefits of that, I think, and, you know, is managing to get a good attachment and feel much more comfortable with us. So, you know, we're using the sort of principles of positive behavioral reinforcement to help us settle down. And the same thing goes for people. You know, we function best when we are being looked after, when we're cared for, when we're understood and listened to. Okay, so that's really, really important. And, you know, in terms of our clinical practice, we're looking after patients, and that can be very draining at times, having consultations with people. Important that we feel supported in our relationships with patients, with colleagues, that we have job satisfaction, and that we can manage confidently in our work environments or our roles. And I think the other part of coaching that's really important to think about is development. So what we're doing is trying to help people find a place where they can be fulfilled both personally and professionally. And I think often when people are feeling fulfilled, they're also learning. It might be that they're learning about themselves, they've had a difficult time, they're trying to weigh things up. It might be that they're kind of rebalancing their lives after having had a child come into the family, or while they're being a carer for elder parents, or thinking about how they manage their work-life balance. But it's actually finding a way to feel in control of things, to take them forward and feel you're making positive choices that suit you. And sometimes, you know, we work with people, obviously, that have committed themselves to a certain career and then are having doubts about whether that's the right way for them to go forward. Do they want to go for promotion, or would they rather stay at the same level? And often, you know, people might be considering working part-time rather than full-time to try and achieve more of a balance in their overall lives. Whoops, just there we are. So then just, you know, how does mentoring benefit doctors? This just really brings together some of the points that I've made already, but I think having that relationship with somebody who's outside of your immediate sphere of work, really, really important, who you feel you can trust, who will allow you to talk and explore and think below the surface of the immediate problems you might be presenting, the immediate issues that might be concerning you, but it's a confidential space, and that is so, so important. that the mentee, the coachee, brings and develops their own agenda, that they develop agency and have a focus then around what they want to explore and talk about. And the coaching helps them find that focus. Not everybody comes along with, I want to talk about this and I want to sort out this issue. It's sort of sometimes a bit more, well, I'm not sure where to start. And this gives a space to begin that process of exploring. But really good to have the opportunity to reflect with another person, what's going well, what's maybe not going so well, or how can I get from working really well to working fantastically well in this particular environment. Other things about, why do I keep making the same mistakes or fall down the same pit? Sometimes there are long-standing issues that may sit below the surface of the individual. We see that quite a bit in our clinical work, for example, when, for example, an individual may get into a fairly unhealthy relationship, manage to leave that relationship and get into a relationship again that is very, very similar. They're drawn to the same sort of person. And psychotherapeutically, we'd be exploring that. But I think all of us may have valences, issues that we tend to recur in our work environment. And so there is something about, keep getting into this situation, think I've been here before, why is that happening? Some space to explore it and find a different way forward. And here I think also, we wouldn't necessarily delve deeply into the unconscious mind and its processes, but I think it's just important to know about what is conscious and what actually sits below the surface that we can start to articulate and think about. So I think the major benefit is in career direction, thinking about how can I maximize my contribution at work while maintaining a good work-life balance. What sort of person am I, and is this a particular career direction that suits me? Do I want to rethink that? I've recently retired from my substantive NHS role, so I'm having a bit of a transition around thinking about how I might do things differently going forward. Where might I make my maximum contribution over the next 2, 3 or whatever years? I think often taking on leadership roles, many of us are obviously in peer groups, and then if we take on a promotion, we're then in a different kind of role. And so that can be isolating in itself. But there are particular challenges of leadership as well that can be really helped through mentoring and coaching. And as I mentioned before, really important to have a plan that comes out of each coaching session. And it's not just about thinking, it's about thinking to inform our ways forward, to inform how the coachee wishes to change things going forward.